Research has too often been done in silos, with great focus on a narrow area of expertise. But through shared knowledge and access to data, wider problems can be solved. From inequality to sustainability, from helping our ageing population to better ways of raising our children. It's that spark of an idea, disrupting what we know. By thinking differently, our behaviour will change. This research is already happening. But now there is a new home in Cardiff that brings it together. A place open to the world that celebrates and encourages innovative thinking, collaborative working, and sharing ideas. The world's first social science research park. Spark. A spark to change our futures.
Good afternoon to everyone joining us on this beautiful afternoon in Cardiff. I'm Charlotte Stevenson. I'm a business development manager working in professional development at Cardiff University. And we'd love to welcome you to the end of our first week of our 2-week virtual summer school. And we've had some great sessions this week and some more next week. So the virtual summer school was born out of the pandemic when we couldn't deliver any face-to-face CPD activity. So we started delivering these free webinars online, and it's developed over the last 3 years. This year, we're focusing on some of the fantastic research that's being undertaken at Cardiff University. A few bits of housekeeping before we get going with our speakers this afternoon. We've got the chat function open if you need to talk to the team, if you've got any sound problems, etc. We've got the Q&A open, so please pose any questions as we go along to the team. There'll be a natural point during the presentation where we can pose some questions, and there'll be some time at the end of the presentation. So do type them in as you're going along, and we'll make sure that everyone gets asked. You'll be receiving an evaluation form at the end of the virtual summer school, which is the end of next week. We please ask that you fill in that, because it will give us the information that we need to carry on this kind of free CPD activity. So that's enough from me. I'm really thrilled to introduce Peter G, Julie Hepburn and Oliver Ottmann to discuss the development of public patient involvement in clinical trials research. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Let me just share my screen now. To go into for a sec. Let me know when you can see that.
Yeah, we can see that.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So my name's Pete. I'm the Senior Public Involvement Manager for Health and Care Research Wales, based in Cardiff. So my role is to make sure that all the funded infrastructure and research centres that we fund and support involves members of the public throughout. And I'm here today to talk about Health and Care Research Wales and how we involve members of the public in our research. I'll pass you over to Julie, who's going to introduce herself.
Thanks, Pete. My name's Julie, and I have 8 years' experience of public involvement in the cancer field. And I'm currently the lay lead research partner for both the Experimental Cancer Medicine Centre and the Wales Cancer Research Centre. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie. And Oliver?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Oliver Ottmann. I'm a clinical academic hematologist with an emphasis on clinical trials. I'm director of the Division of Cancer and Genetics at Cardiff University, and also head the Division of Hematology, and I'm the co-lead of the Cardiff Experimental Cancer Medicine Centre, which you'll hear more about later, together with my colleague Rob Jones, who represents oncology, whereas I represent hematology.
Thanks, Oliver. So what we're going to talk about today is the development of PPI, or public and patient involvement in clinical trials research. So we talk about what is public involvement, why undertake public involvement, and how to involve members of public in clinical trials. And we talk about the research cycle and touch upon how and why to involve them at all stages of the research cycle. But Before we touch upon public involvement, I'll just give a brief background to what is Health and Care Research Wales. So Health and Care Research Wales is a networked organisation supported by the Welsh Government, which brings together a wide range of partners. So we work in close partnership with other government agencies and research funders, both in Wales and across the UK. We work with industry partners, patients, service users, members of the public and other stakeholders. Our main goal is to ensure that today's research makes a difference to tomorrow's care. So we promote, support and provide collective oversight of health and social care research in Wales to ensure it's of the highest international scientific quality, it's relevant to the needs and challenges of health and social care in Wales, and makes a difference to policy and practice in ways that improves lives of patients, public, people and the communities in Wales. So we work with NHS Wales, so all health boards across Wales. We work with local authorities, universities as well, charities, third sector organisation, research institutes and commercial partners. So we fund over 25 research centres based throughout Wales. And then my role is to make sure that each research centre and all organisations are involving members of the public. I'll just hand you over to Julie. We're going to do a quick engagement task, so she's going to explain what we're doing now.
Right, thanks, Pete. Yeah, we're now going to carry out a Mentee Poll, which you can access on your phone or your laptop, and the address and code are shown below on the screen there. We've put together a list of some questions we think you'd want to have answered, but we want to know which are the most important ones for you personally. So we want you to choose 3 of the 6 on this list. And we're showing the list here now for those of you who can't access the Mentee Poll. The code and the address are still at the top of the screen, which is good for you to go on and start answering now. But if you will save the result of the poll, have a look at it now, but then revisit it at the end. But meanwhile, if you do have any additional questions you want to put at any stage, you could enter those in the Q&A and we'll pick them up later on in the afternoon. Okay, and we've got some results coming up now.
I like the way this is a live feed on this. You can see the results in real time. How do I find the right people? That's a good priority. And we can touch upon that later as well when we're talking about members of the public in the research cycle. You know, why reinvent the wheel if there's already patient and public groups out there? So you don't have to set up your own groups. You can always go out to meet with other organisations, but also in Health and Care Research Wales, we have a group and organisation of members of the public that you can access. How do I measure what difference they make to the research? Bro. We'll give it a minute or 2 longer and then we'll get cracking. And what Julie said is, we're hoping we will touch upon all aspects of all these themes and topics throughout our presentation. But if we don't at the end, we've got opportunities to ask further questions and we can touch upon the answers that, you know, we may not have covered. All right, 1 more minute. You can still answer these slides will still be up there, so we're going to come back to them at the end of the presentation. So if you still can't decide what questions to prioritize, keep on going and we'll just carry on with the presentation. So throughout everything we do in Health and Care Research Wales, we involve patients, service users, carers and the public. So this is key to our work in order to ensure the research we support is relevant and effectively delivered. So good quality research is essential to help us find new treatments, ways to improve health and care services, and this is not possible without the support and contributions of members of the public. So we believe that meaningful public involvement is important for undertaking good, safe and proper research and should be a routine and normal part of the research process. So in Health and Care Research Wales, we have a public involvement community. We have, these are quite old, these not old, but we have 400+ members now based on our community. Members of the public have been involved in strategy development on trials and studies, part of the trial management groups, part of study document review, involved in data collection as well. So the Wales Cancer Bank are involved members of the public throughout data collection and research priorities as well. So we recently ran a research prioritization exercise with the Wales COVID Evidence Centre. So they wanted to work with members of the public to help shape the future of their research. And they wanted to meet with people who are more impacted by COVID-19, so more underserved communities. So we ran and hosted 4 workshops. So people of colour, people living with a disability, young people, and people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And these focus groups have helped shape and identify research priorities and questions that the research will be answering then. So members of the public can be involved in all stages. It's not one size fits all. I'm going to explain, hopefully I'll explain with the next 2 slides how what member of the public is and how do we involve members of the public. So I can't see a chat box option, but if you want to write in the chat box, you'll be able to see it. So hopefully this will make sense, but can you tell me what this is? It's a pretty easy one, but can you tell me what it is? And if you know what it is, can you give me some varieties of what they are? Oh, I can see the chat now. Yeah, loaf of bread. Yeah, loaf of bread. And what types of varieties are there of loaves of bread? Or bread varieties? Cool. Sourdough, yeah. Rye spelt sliced. Just make me hungry. I haven't had lunch yet, so hopefully have it shortly. Okay, right. Moving on to the next one. And again, can you name what these items are? You know, what can you do with bread? Bread and butter pudding, yeah, yum. And we got a sandwich, obviously, we got breadcrumbs, and we got migas down there as well, which is like a Portuguese Spanish dish, which is, if you haven't had it, it's absolutely brilliant. So if you can find it on a restaurant, please get it. It's brilliant. So it's a tenuous link, but what I'm getting at is there's a number of different varieties of bread and a number of different ways of using bread, and that's the same with public involvement. You got loads of different terminologies. So there's such as citizen science, there's user-led public engagement, lay involvement, co-production. These are all used to describe public involvement. And there's many different ways that you can involve the members of the public in your work. You can involve them from reviewing a public-facing document to make it more user-friendly and lay-friendly with other members of the public. You can involve members of the public throughout the duration of your project. They could support as an advisory group or involved in the trial management group. And members of the public can run the studies as well. So this is like a user-led aspect of public involvement. So what I'm trying to say is there's no one definite approach to public involvement. There's a multitude of ways of involving members of the public. And I go on to explain different ways that we can involve members of the public when we're talking about the research cycle. But if we move on to what is public involvement. So the Hcrw, so Health Research Authority, defines public involvement in researchers as research being carried out with or by members of the public rather than to, about, or for them. So involvement is where members of the public are actively involved in the research projects and in research organizations, and participation is where people take part in research. So data collection, recruited into a clinical trial, qualitative research as well, so focus groups. And engagement is when you're telling people about your research, so why it's important, what it found out, and the impact and implications of the results. There's a bit of a grey area with like public involvement and qualitative research. It's different. So public involvement is also different to qualitative research, where you are collecting data from patients, service users, and carers, and finding out their views and opinions as participants in the study. The distinction is particularly important as you would require ethical approval for participation in a study. So it is a bit of a grey area to public involvement, but I can circulate these slides afterwards. So this is sort of why undertake public involvement. So I like to describe public involvement as the long-term impact of your research. So your short and medium terms, your like publications, your presentations, your further funding, but the long-term impact is how it impacts and affects members of the public. So it's the reason why you've undertaken this research in the first place. Members of the public can help keep focus, structure, and the public and the forefront of your research. So have a clear aim for involving the public and be honest and realistic about the extent of the influence members of the public can have on the research so that the public involvement is meaningful. And good public involvement is worth investing in. It can lead to development of high quality research and makes it easier to recruit and retain patients. So this is because the research is more likely to be designed and conducted in a way which is acceptable to them. It makes research more relevant, so the research results are more likely to benefit the patient and public. You define what is likely to be acceptable by patients and participants, particularly in controversial or sensitive research. Improve the informed consent process, making it easier for participants to understand the research and the potential risks, as it's now a terminology that they will understand. And improve the experience of participants in research and improve the communication of findings to participants and the wider members of the public. You provide information on the progress of research as well as the findings and results. I'll just hand you over to Oliver now, who's talking about his work in ECMC.
Yes, thanks, Pete. So I just for the beginning dwell for a second on how drug development is actually conducted through clinical trials. And I don't think that you can see my cursor, but if you focus on this little central scheme in the top, these arrows, it all starts in the lab with researchers finding new drugs, finding new targets, developing assays, and so forth. So this then eventually reaches a stage where there is a candidate drug, something that is very promising, that has been rigorously tested in so-called preclinical models, test tube or animals, which then will go into clinical trials where we don't really know all that much about the drug. At the other end of the spectrum, and this is called a phase 1 trial. At the other spectrum, at the other end of the spectrum, we are testing drugs that really have gone through a fair amount of testing in humans. So it might be a confirmatory trial, the last trial before approval of a drug for a certain disease, or it might be a drug that has been approved for one disease and is being tested in a large study for another one. And these are typically randomized trials where patients are allocated between an exploratory, experimental arm and the standard of care. And then in between phase 1 and phase 3, there is a study phase that where we already know a little bit about the safety of the drug, the dose, how it is scheduled, how we should deliver it. But we've only an inkling on whether or not and to what degree it might work or not. And so phase 2 trials are a bit larger, and they already contain a lot of science in which what we call reverse translation, go back from the patient, from the trial, and into the lab. So the Cardiff, or the Experimental Cancer Medicine Center, which ECMC for short, is a network of centers throughout the United Kingdom. It's funded by Cancer Research UK. There are 18 adult centers and I think 9 pediatric. Some cities actually have both pediatric and adult ECMCs. And Cardiff, as you can see in the bottom left in Wales, only site in Wales, is a tripartite arrangement. It involves Cardiff University, Cardiff and Vale University Health Board, and Velindre Cancer Centre and University Trust. So what this does is that it ensures that patients in Wales have access to trials in both hematology, so liquid tumors and solid tumors. And the ECMC focuses on the early phase, so phase 1, and it goes a little bit into phase 2, and it goes a little bit into the preclinical work. So it is a very clear area of research which is pivotal for getting something from the lab into the clinic and towards approval. And one aspect which I would like you to keep in mind, which applies to all trials, is that they benefit patients. There's been a lot of research showing that patients in clinical trials are treated in a more rigorous manner, they're observed more closely, and outcome is better. So clinical trials are something positive. The other aspect that I would like to focus on is that the Cardiff has a JC accredited site for both transplant and delivery of advanced therapies. And this is a new area of targeted drugs that are increasingly at the forefront of cancer treatment and really revolutionizing how we deal with these diseases. We are looking in the Cardiff ECMC together with Clinical Trials Research, which is the trials research unit at Cardiff University, in novel design of drugs so that we can maximize access of patients to trials and trials to patients. And as I've alluded to, we have a lot of interaction with our other colleagues, both on the preclinical side, who are looking, for example, taking biopsies, tissue samples, doing research on them, integrating data that might come from the clinical side, from imaging, from pathology, and so forth. So what you can see is that this is a very multidisciplinary, interactive environment in Cardiff, which delivers clinical trials. Now, can you go to the next slide, please? What I've alluded to is that in the new era, we are increasingly looking at drugs that would be placed in the category of precision medicine. And as the name suggests, this means that we are targeting better, that we're starting to individualize treatment to an individual patient needs, and taking information both from the tumor, from the cancer of the patients, but also how it interacts with the patient and maybe other patients' features and settings that are increasingly being taken into account as we have sharper and more precise tools, both in terms of treatment and in terms of diagnosis. And the outcome of this, the intended outcome, is that treatments will be more effective and they will be also gentler, kinder, not have as many side effects, and thereby improving the quality of life. Now, what does this mean for the interaction with the patient? How does this relate to public and patient involvement? And it means that we have a shift from this paradigm of saying, well, we're just going to measure something like the size of a tumor on an X-ray, and actually listen more to the patient and how the patient perceives the treatment, how he or she sees what we are doing. And so it is a much more active role that the patients increasingly have, which means that they have to be more and more informed with complex decisions. So the participation is a good thing, but it is something that obviously is a challenge and means that the patient also needs a lot of additional support, access to information, to other patients, support groups, and so forth. And I am absolutely convinced that this more patient-centric approach that is gaining traction in all study phases, but also in early phase, can only be achieved by a well-organized PPI team that is knowledgeable and has developed its strength in various sub-areas of cancer in our case. The next slide, please. So the ECMC is very fortunate to have a very good and potent and engaged PPI team, and you'll hear from Julie right after this. And this list here, I won't go through it in detail, is just to illustrate the areas in which PPI can become involved. It can be at an early stage, already in the design of a clinical trial and selecting patient groups and ensuring that there's equitable access of all patient groups to a certain type of treatment. It can facilitate how we go about collecting samples from tumors in the beginning or during the treatment, how we collect the data, feed it back to the patients, the ethics around this, how we enable easier reporting by the patient, for example, with digital apps, and reaching out to the community to make create greater awareness of trials and opportunities for patients. So it is a complex field, an important field, and one where in Cardiff, I'm really glad to say that we're very fortunate to have a superb interaction, and with my hat on at the moment between the ECMC and Julie's team, but of course this could be said by other units and divisions in Cardiff as well. So I think I'll stop there and hand over to Julie.
Thanks, Oliver. Yeah, and this next slide is just why some members of the public have got involved in helping out with research. So you might want to just briefly look through those. They're fairly typical. And certainly I resonate with those reasons, but I also have a few sort of personal reasons of my own. So if you could move on to the next slide, Pete, I'll just talk about my experience. And to start off, I'll just briefly outline my personal cancer experience. So both my parents died of cancer. And 8 years ago, I had a stage 3 bowel cancer, which was successfully treated by surgery and chemotherapy. Thankfully, there's been no recurrence, and I've been fit and well since then. So the question is sort of, why do I do it? Well, in addition to the reasons mentioned earlier, the first reason is actually the one on the earlier slide about helping to improve the diagnosis and treatment for other cancer patients. That is sort of top of the list. But other reasons, I had a degree in physiology, and I'm interested in medical science, though I've never actually worked in research. So, I understand what I read. I enjoy finding out about medical developments. I also wanted to make some sort of contribution to the community in retirement, because all this happened just as I was retiring, that I got cancer. And I wanted to feel useful as well in retirement, and also to use some of the skills that I developed from my previous career, which was actually in careers work. So I decided public involvement in cancer research ticked all these boxes. And so I've been involved ever since over the last 8 years and thoroughly enjoyed it. So standard and less standard activities. Well, there's a huge range of activities that we can get involved in. And Oliver's mentioned something in that earlier slide of public involvement activities related to ECMC. And I've done several of those. And I would say that the commonest activities that the public get involved in, and certainly when they're starting to get involved in this work, are reviewing trial protocols to make sure the lay summary is understandable to the public, and sometimes writing them from scratch. Sometimes, I've been asking, will you do it? And sometimes easier that way than trying to review one that someone else has written. Giving feedback on whether what the patients are being asked to do is reasonable and acceptable. And this is really important, because if it's not reasonable and acceptable, you might not get any participants and you don't have a trial then. There's an interesting question on the NIHR reviews that I do for funding applications. And it asks the PPI reviewer, it said, would you take part in this trial and would you recommend it to your friends and family? And I think if I'd ever written no in that, that would be a serious negative mark against that trial. So they do want it to be acceptable. Looking at patient documentation and consent forms is again a sort of bread and butter activity, making sure everything's easy to understand for the patients. trying sometimes to reduce the length of patient information sheets. Sometimes they'll run to 17 pages, and it's an awful lot for the participant to have to take in. So yeah, sometimes we can try and shorten them. And then being a member of a trial management group and monitoring the trial as it progresses and troubleshooting and helping to solve problems. That's a really good way to start off and get good experience in public involvement. And then at the end of the trial, helping with disseminating the results, perhaps writing lay articles for people to read, suggesting lay opportunities to spread the word. And these are all the standard activities. Just a little bit on the less standard activities, because a huge range of options does come up. And these aren't on the list earlier, I think. 3 or 4 years ago, I had an opportunity to be involved in a Horizon program. It was called We Need to Talk About Death. I starred in it for all of 2 minutes and was then interviewed live on the Wyn Evans radio show the following day. That was more nerve-wracking because it was live radio, which I hadn't done before. I was also invited to address a cross-party Senate meeting on a public review of medical research last December. I got 15 minutes that time, so it was a bit longer. And I've also been involved with a group from Cancer Research UK to lobby Senate members at a lunchtime event on priorities for cancer research. And that was one of the face-to-face meetings that happened more than 2 years ago. So you never know what opportunities might be offered next in public involvement, but you do have the option to accept or turn them down as a volunteer. So looking at different settings, different types of research, again, there's a big range. We can be involved in drug trials with clinicians or quality of life trials, which are often qualitative research. It can be taking part in the community, in hospitals, and it can be run by the NHS, charities, commercial companies, or university-led. So really is a huge range. And some of these trials can be quite technical or statistical, which makes them perhaps a little more difficult to understand for a public member. But we have to keep in mind that our purpose for being there is putting the patient viewpoint, which doesn't always require total understanding of all the technical details and statistical techniques of a trial. I have to say, all the clinicians and researchers I've been involved with, they're always willing to explain and answer questions, and I've always felt treated as a full and equal member of the team. The next one down, the short versus longer term involvement. Yeah, some opportunities are very short term. It can be a single document to review. It can be participation in a focus group sometimes, and these are the more one-off things. Trial management groups are always a bit longer term. A trial can last 5 years, and then it can lead to follow-on trials. So you can be sort of on the list forever. And over this length of time, you're able to get to know the people in the team. And so I find it more satisfying. You can feel that you're contributing more. But there are also opportunities to work in sort of larger advisory groups where there's a group of research partners acting as a critical friend or a sounding board for an infrastructure group. And I'm thinking here of our research partner group that we have for Wales Cancer Research Centre, which has 7 members, and there's a genomics sounding board for the All Wales Genomics Service, and the super group for the Prime Centre. And some industries have also set these up, and that's perhaps a more recent development. And the advantage of these larger ongoing groups is that the group develops an in-depth knowledge of the area, and they can be called upon to offer strategic advice on public involvement on an ongoing basis. So it's a different type of involvement, that. Governance bodies and leadership groups, another type of involvement. I'm thinking here of boards for trial units, executive committees and management boards in the various infrastructure units. Again, the basic role is the same. It's putting forward the patient and the public point of view, but it's quite a different setting, being on a senior committee, which might not appeal to everyone. And it might need a slightly different skill set for this sort of role to that required for reviewing documents. which does lead on to maybe the last question. Who are you looking for and how do you find the right person? So you need to identify what the role is you're trying to fill and what specific experience you need the public involvement person to have. And it might be that you want lived experience or carer experience for a focus group, or it might be experience of committee work for a governance role. But you need to work out what it is you need and draw up a role description with the skills required so that the advert is going to attract people with the right skills. But we also have to bear in mind here that we need to increase the diversity of people undertaking public involvement in order to include the full range of public experience filling into our research. And at present, we tend to have a very narrow profile of people taking part. I'm fairly typical, I suppose, of people who join these groups. And we need to reach out to wider groups, and we need to train and support people if they don't have all the skills to start with, so that they can develop the skills and experience and take on the full range of PPI opportunities available. And I know Pete will be talking more about recruiting, supporting and training PPI. So I'll finish here and take a few questions if you have them from the Q&A box, and we'll try and provide answers.
Hi Julie, we've got a direct one here for you, I think. What support did you receive when starting out as a PPI representative?
What did I receive? Well,
what support did you receive?
Sorry, what support? Okay, yeah. Well, I applied through the public involvement community that Pete mentioned earlier, and I didn't have an induction to the first trial, though later on, as things developed more, I did have an induction for later trials. I was offered training on the courses that are run at the sports centre, and I attended 2 or 3 of those on public involvement. They run one that's alongside researchers, a training course. I attended that one, and there was one on the I've got the name of it now, but it was quite a while ago. I have attended 2 or 3, and then I have done some webinars as well, just general ones that are more widely available through people like NIHR, and they've got some very good materials on their website that I've also completed as well. So there's a lot out there, and you are encouraged to take up the training. It's very good training. And then, of course, you meet other PPI people as well, and you learn from each other, and you just sort of learn more and more as you go along.
That's great. I'm not sure who this question is directed to, so jump in whoever feels more appropriate to answer this one. Knowing that how trials are run can impact massively on patient experience, how much interaction are PPI groups or teams having with pharma regarding development of new treatments?
With pharma, are you meaning with pharma?
I don't know. Somebody's just put pharm, so PHARM. So that could be pharmacy, big pharma. I'm not sure. So
companies, I would think. Yes, could you just read that question again? Sure.
Yeah, no problem. Knowing how trials are run can impact massively on patient experience. How much interaction are PPI groups teams having with Big Pharma regarding development of new treatments? She just popped in the question there that it is Big Pharma.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that to start with, interaction with Big Pharma is really just at a starting point. There are a few companies that have involved the public, and I've been involved with companies, not so much Big Pharma, more sort of small companies running focus groups. But knowing how trials are run, I mean, the participants in a trial will be given a lot of the information in the public information sheet. And I think that is really important, and they've got to know all the risks that they might be taking on and the possible benefits and everything. In terms of the sort of technicalities of how a trial is run, I don't know that participants necessarily need to become involved in all that. Public involvement people will get to know a lot about how trials are run, because that's what they're doing on a trial management group. And so I think they can be very useful in feeding back to pharma, where there might be problems in the design of a trial that are going to be caused for the participants. So the public involvement people, I think, are there to help see those problems, try and put it right, put the design of the trial so that it's actually going to work for the participants. Does that answer the question?
Yes, I think it does. Another question here, well, follow up really from the person who posed that question. I'm thinking about the development in the laboratory, in the lab, in treatments, even before it gets to the trial stage.
Well,
Coming here, Julie?
Joe, are you coming in?
Yeah, do you want me to make
Yes,
a comment there?
very happy to answer that one.
Okay. So I guess I represent the lab stage and how we're engaging in that way. And I suppose in order to answer your question, Mandy, I think that was from in the chat. Yes, we recognise that pharma should really be getting engaged in this and involving people at an earlier stage of their development. Actually, that's part of why we were doing this event today and trying to connect with commercial partners to get that ball rolling. And we see that very much as a work in progress to develop over the next few years. We absolutely sort of see that benefit, and pharma are starting to come around to that way of thinking as well, and starting to ask that question, maybe a bit belatedly, but better late than never. And certainly we want to engage to bring that forward in terms of from the right from the start, in terms of the discovery science. Yes, the kind of involvement side of things is going all the way through that pipeline, if you like, before it even gets into a clinical trial. So I think I've got an example coming up in one of Pete's slides, that I have a patient sounding board that I can talk to about the research ideas that I have coming up. And sometimes those ideas are developed with pharma partners as well. And we can bounce ideas off each other in terms of, this is what I was thinking of doing for the research. And it can go back and forth with my patient sounding board to develop that idea right from the beginning, if you like, and to add extra parts into it that I wouldn't have even thought about. So certainly that use of PPI right from the very beginning is finding its way into all stages of trial development, right from the lab bit, really. So I hope that's answered your question, Mandy, but feel free to email me if you want any further explanations on that.
Mandy said, thank you, that's good to hear. So I think we've answered that one.
Yeah.
I think we've answered quite a lot of questions there. Are you happy to move on, and then we can finish up with some questions right at the end, so anybody can post their questions as we're going along? Yeah, good.
There was just one, sorry, Charlotte, there was just one thing I'd like to add in that I thought of while Joe was answering, and that is ethics committees, because pharma, they can have delays with ethics committees if things are turned down, and PPI, I think, are really quite good, especially if they've been involved in ethics committees before, at spotting the possible difficulties that might crop up. So those can be put right before it goes to the ethics committee and save a lot of time for Big Pharma. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yes, the research cycle, and I'm just introducing this one though. So we're going to look in a bit more depth at the different elements of research where PPI can become involved. And this diagram shows the research cycle. And it applies to all sorts of medical research, whatever the situation, and PPI can be involved at all the stages. In the past, it was common to just appoint the public involvement people at the start of a trial once the commissioning had been completed and when the trial management group was being assembled. But more recently, funding bodies want to see evidence of a lot earlier involvement when the trial's at the early planning stages, to make sure the design of the project takes the public view into account and that PPI is planned throughout the trial. And there are specific questions now on when applying for funding bids to ask these, what are your plans for PPI? How do you propose to involve them? How are they costed throughout the trial? So things have changed, and we're coming in right at the beginning, which is good because that's where the design takes place. So we're now going to go through each stage, and Pete and I are going to do a dual act on these, and he's got the next one. So
Thanks, Julie. Just to flag, yeah, members of the public should be involved in the research at earlier stages and can be involved in a whole range of activities, as we've touched upon. And Julie mentioned activities that she's been involved in as well, which is a huge array of activities. These include helping design the research and develop the research question, applying for funding and ethical approval, sitting on advisory groups, carrying out analysis of data and disseminating the research findings. Just to flag as well, you do not need to undertake all the activity described to have suitable, relevant and good quality public involvement with your project. You should try and undertake the activities that are most relevant to your project and to the patients and public that you are actively involved in. So we're going to go through each stage of the research cycle and talk about the why reasons to involve members of the public and how to involve members of the public. So in identifying a prioritizing stage, while you're doing it, because it informs the research priorities, the priorities are issues important to members of the public as service users. It helps research to identify new topics, and it increases the likelihood of funding as well, as Julie mentioned on the funding panels, and it maximizes your pathway to impact from the start of your project. To do this, you could contact local user groups. Julie mentioned some of the groups that she is involved in. There's a lot of research advisory groups throughout Wales as well, and many of the centres that we fund have an advisory group within their centres. Access members of the public through Health and Care Research Wales. So we've got the public involvement community. You are able to access members of the public through our work. I've got slides at the end of this, and I can send you links of where best to access the group so we can develop an advert for you. You listen to people's own experiences and unmet needs and adopt existing frameworks for involvement, so UK-wide public involvement standards. Involving members of the public in this stage can help the research priorities align with those patients and service users. So what's the importance of the research? It is not going to benefit members of the public, so why do it? So however, it's a bit of a grey area, as does depend on what you're researching. So as Oliver mentioned earlier, preclinical is quite difficult to involve members of the public, but there is ways of doing so. We've got examples here of a bone marrow transplant patient sounding board, which I think Joe mentioned earlier, where they meet when they have research studies, and the sounding board will provide feedback and identify priorities for that research. We talk about commissioning and funding. So involving members of the public in this stage can give a broader perspective to the review process by bringing into considerations the issues that are important from a public perspective. Reasons you do this: it helps explore clinically important research areas, it aligns research with public interest and patient and needs, it gives a greater credibility to your research proposal, and it opens up funding opportunities from patient organisations and charities. Again, a few ways that you can do this. So you can involve the public in review and lay summaries, research proposal and public involvement plans, making sure appropriate costs are allocated. Invite people to identify possible ethical issues, especially if you're running clinical studies, and how that would affect members of the public and patients. Offer an active role in developing the research grant application. So we're seeing more and more of this in research, where members of the public are being actively involved in developing research grant proposals and applications. And connect with organisations representing patient groups, or consider who's commissioning research as well. So link with Health and Care Research Wales, speak to us, get members of the public involved to at this stage of your research. We've got examples here. So in Health and Care Research Wales, we have members of the public involved in our funding and ethics panel as well. So every funding application that comes through to Health and Care Research Wales, we have a public involvement section, and members of the public review that public involvement section as well. So they look through to see how you involve members of the public through each stage of the research cycle. Will it be just tokenistic, or will it be actually a full involvement throughout each stage? So yeah, bear that in mind when you're applying. Pass you over to Julie, who's going to talk about her understanding of the design of plan and her involvement in this.
Okay, and it's all about getting the design right from the start in this area. And it's the activities that PPI particularly can help with, and making sure all the patient-facing documentation is easy to understand and the lay summary clear. And patient recruitment is particularly important because, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't have participants, you haven't got a trial. So those aspects are, particularly important for PPI to have a look at. The diversity of participants is also important, And this is really quite a difficult one to tackle. You know, everyone's trying to increase diversity and trying out different ways, but it's not an easy one to solve. All I can say really is I think you have a better chance of being successful in increasing the diversity of participants if you have more diverse PPI, because they will have views that can help you increase this. And it's very important that you give PPI real roles in helping to manage a project. We want to really contribute in the research that's been taken part. We don't just want to sort of sit there to tick a box. We want real jobs to do. And sometimes I think researchers feel that, you know, they don't want to give us too much. But in the main, a lot of us have a lot of time, and, you know, we can help with quite a range of tasks. So the example I put down here is one that I was part of. I was a member of a trial management group, and it was looking at cancer awareness and beliefs in disadvantaged populations and areas. And one of the questionnaires we looked at in the design of the what was going to be carried out was a quality of life questionnaire. And I noticed that several of the questions on this quality of life questionnaire were identical to those that are asked on a disability benefit application form, which could possibly affect recruitment and retention for the trial, I felt, where there'd be a significant number of people in the area who were on benefits that they were wanting to take part in this trial. None of the researchers were aware of this and were quite surprised, I think. And in the end, the questionnaire was changed to another one that they felt would be more acceptable. Okay, so that's over to you again, Pete.
We've double act on this, aren't we?
Yeah.
So stage 4 of the research cycle is undertaking and analysing. So involving members of the public at this stage can contribute to conducting the research by getting them involved to collect the data and sort of analyse the data. If you're looking at doing this with members of the public, it's really important to think about what training is available for members of the public, not just members of the public, but also for yourself as well. So what training will they need if they are going out and collecting the data? If it's qualitative research, will they need to go on qualitative methods training or anything like that to do with the data collection? Many reasons why to do it. Improves the quality and relevance of data collected. Members of the public are going out collecting the data. They've got a peer-to-peer relationship. Improves the honesty, reliability, and depth of response of patient insights. Enrich and improve the quality of the interpretation and inclusion, and increase the likelihood of publication in a peer-reviewed journal. How to do this as well, so involve the patients in performing a library-based review or reviewing documentary evidence. Involve members of the public in carrying out interviews and surveys or running focus groups, which we've done previously. So my role was working as a lead for a youth public advisory group based in Cardiff University, and we had members of the public, young people, helping on co-production elements, and they would run focus groups with us and carry out interviews and develop surveys as well. You can get the members of the public to assist you in developing missing themes from your data, and get the public to assist you in developing, oh no, repeat myself twice, ignore that. So examples, sort of reliability, peer-to-peer, and its communication on a relatable level as well. So really, really important stage, and I think involving members of the public at this stage will bring an enriched element to your research, and it will develop different areas that you may not have perceived as well.
Okay, it's back to me for disseminating. So you will be disseminating results of your research to a wide range of people, academic journals, but also public-facing publications and social media to reach the public. And even scientific patients can benefit from a lay summary. And I've just completed 9 of these for the COVID Research Centre. And they were all scientific papers, but ones that the public might want to read, but they wanted to have an easily digestible bit first to see if it was some area they were interested in. I read once about a leading researcher who reviews on NIHR funding panels, and he said that he always reads the lay summary first before he delves into all the scientific details in a funding bid, to get an overall view of what research is about. So it does give you this easy to understand picture. And members of the public can also come up with ideas for channels and networks to communicate results to the public. So they can help formulate a dissemination strategy for public dissemination. And they can help write articles, though not everyone might be happy to speak at a conference, which is another thing that sometimes people are asked to do. I think it was a lot easier in, when conferences were all Zoom conferences. It was much easier for PPI to join in than the idea of going and speaking to a hall full of people. The example for this, again, a recent project I've been involved in. I was asked to help develop an infographic, which is a cartoon with a sort of soundtrack to help explain the results of the research. We did have a commercial company to actually do all the technical bits, but myself and some researchers actually looked at, how to best put the message across to the public. And I also, for the same project, took part in a webinar that was run by a cancer charity in Wales, again, to talk about the results for the same project. And there was myself and the chief investigator ran this. And, I find it's challenging, but it's interesting, and you learn some new skills, But again, it's up to people what exactly they want to get involved in as members of the public. So I think we're moving on to the next one, Pete, for you.
Yep. And then we got stage 6 of the research cycle is implementing. So why do we do this? So it's helping your project have a greater impact, sees your work reached and adopted by more diverse groups, and improves public opinion, acceptance, and insights in the research area. Ensuring members of the public in this stage of the research cycle, it leads to action and can establish relationship with key agencies and policymakers, almost like a call to action. You can do this by getting assistance from public and patient groups in lobbying for change. Ask for people who involve for ideas on creative ways to implement or maximise the impact of your work. Patients and public can sort of increase the likelihood that the results of the research are implemented by adding validity to the findings, and develop patient information for new sort of services and interventions within hospitals, or GP surgeries, etc. So key area again for involving members of the public, and as we mentioned, lobbying for change, so Wales Industry Forum, and there's a PPI voice within that. I think, Julie, you mentioned you were involved in meeting with the Senedd and lobbying for change for a public involvement opportunity that you were involved in. And then last but not least of the research cycle, we've got evaluating. Back to Julie. We're playing tennis here with slides, aren't we?
It is. Right, yeah, it is really important to measure what difference PPI have made to a project and how the interaction between the researchers and the PPI develops throughout the project life. What problems might have arisen for the PPI and how have these been solved as the research has gone along. Everyone agrees that PPI is a good thing, but what evidence do we have to prove this? And it's really important to develop this evidence, as well as to improve the input. Yeah. So it needs both the researchers and the PPI to take part in this exercise. It's not just a sort of one-sided exercise. We need to involve both together, and it needs to be carried out throughout the life of a research project. It's no good at the end of 5 years looking back and racking your brains to think, well, what difference did PPI make? Because you'll have forgotten by then. So the example, one practical way that we've tried doing this on a project I've been involved with, and it was a 5-year project, so it took a long time, was to note down in the minutes of the trial management group, in the PPI section, what impact the PPI had in the previous few months since the last meeting. And it was up to us to say what impact we thought we'd have, but also the researchers to say what impact they thought we'd had. And sometimes there were two different things, and the researchers would think, oh, that was really good. And we'd think, oh, do you really think so? I wouldn't have thought that was important. So, it's got to be the two working together. And the good thing about that was that when we look back for evidence of impact at the end of the 5 years, it's all there in the minutes, and it was easy to go back and track it. But we've moved on from that bit now, and a much improved method has been developed by the WCRC research partner team in the last couple of years, and it's called the Public Involvement Impact Planning and Tracking Pack. And it's designed to help the researchers and the public contributors to plan and to reflect on public involvement and to track the difference public contributions have made. So there's a dialogue going on online throughout the project. It's all aligned with the UK public involvement standards, and there's also a section in it that helps the researchers in setting up the research, again in line with the standards. So it's really quite a sort of a big document, this. It's currently being piloted, and it will be evaluated this summer, and a wider pilot will be carried out before releasing to researchers in the UK and beyond. And there's a lot of interest in it being expressed so far, because everyone wants to measure impact, and there aren't really the tools out there to do it yet. So, you know, that will be, you will be made aware of that as soon as it's ready to roll out. Okay, so I think it's back to you again, Pete, for the last one of these.
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, just to touch upon the impact, it is really difficult to measure the impact of public involvement. But as Julie mentioned, the WCRC have developed a impact tracking tool. So once that comes out to play, it'd be great to see that in action. There's also a few other tools available out there. So you've got the GRIP2 tool, and then the Public Involvement Impact Assessment Framework. And I can put that in the link for you. So the next bit we just touched upon is the, we talked about how to involve members of the public in research, but I'll talk about the UK standards for public involvement. So these are designed to improve the quality and consistency of public involvement in research. So this was developed over 3 years by UK-wide partnerships. So the standards are a description of what good public involvement looks like and encourage approaches and behaviours that are the hallmark of good public involvement, such as flexibility, sharing, learning, and respect for others. So the standards are, they're a framework for what good public involvement in research looks like and are adaptable to different situations. They're designed to encourage reflection and learning, including where lessons have been learned when public involvement has failed and led to expected outcomes. It's a tool to help people and organisations identify what they're doing well and what needs improving, and intended to be used with any method or approach to public involvement within research. So what I'm going to do is just touch upon each of these 6 public involvement standards and just explain them in more detail. So first one we've got is communication. So within the standards, it mentions that you should use plain language communication for well-timed and relevant communication as part of your involvement plans. Communicate with a wider audience about public involvement and research using a broad range of approaches that are acceptable and appealing. We talk about working together, identify ways that suits both yourself and researchers. So work together in ways that values all contributions and that builds and sustains mutually respectful and productive relationships. So public involvement in research is better when people work together towards a common purpose and different perspectives are respected. Inclusive opportunities, so offer public involvement opportunities that are accessible and that reach people and groups according to your research needs. Research needs to be informed by diversity of public experience and insight, so that leads to treatment and services which reflect these needs. It helps to identify rebel ideas as well, come up with different new innovative ways to involve members of the public and to change your research. We talk about impact that Julie just mentioned then, so seek improvement by identifying and sharing the difference that public involvement makes to research. Understand the changes, benefits, and learning gained from the insights and experience of patients, carers, and the public. And then governance as well. So there's ways, Julie mentioned that's part of the governance structure as well. So involve the public in research management, regulation, leadership, and decision-making. Public involvement, research governance can help the research be more transparent and gain public trust. Finally, we've got support and learning, and kind of goes hand in hand in working together. So offer and promote support and learning opportunities that builds confidence and skills for public involvement, not just for members of the public, but also for researchers. And then remove practical and social barriers that stop members of the public and research professionals from making the most of public involvement in research. So we developed a toolkit with a number of questions related to each of these standards. This toolkit will help you monitor your public involvement activities and make sure you're effectively involving members of the public in a safe and appropriate way. And we can share these afterwards as well. Just going to touch upon what we provide in Health and Care Research Wales. So There's access to support for public involvement. So we develop public involvement adverse opportunities which go out to our public involvement community. So you can request involvement support. We have a link to that. It links to one of our team. We'll work together with you to develop your public involvement opportunities. We have an enable involvement fund. So we've got a pot of money which we can cover the costs for members of the public to be involved in the bid development stage of your research proposal. This is only available to people working within the NHS and our research funded community as well. It's not available for commercial partners. However, the access to support is not the funded section. We provide training and guidance both for members of public and research, and we've developed a researcher toolkit, so it's like a one-stop shop for public involvement information. We host a quarterly public involvement forum. So this is a Wales-wide forum on public involvement where we invite external researchers to come along to talk about public involvement, but we also give updates on strategy level and what's taking place in terms of public involvement within Wales. Next one's 6th of July, so if you do want to register, there's still time to register for this event. We'll be touching upon guidance for paying public involvement contributors. And we've got researchers to talk about how members of the public have impacted and changed the research process. And we do provide support for commercial companies as well. So you can access our groups. The only thing you can't do is access our funding for these groups as well. So yeah, I think that's me, and just a few useful contacts as well. So I'm pretty sure these slides, I don't know if they're going to get circulated or what, but we can share these links afterwards as well. So I think if we go back to the Mentee Poll and then see if we've answered all these questions. How do I find the right people? Do you think we've answered that, Julie?
I think so. I think it's knowing what skills you want them to have.
Yeah.
And getting an advert out that is specific, that lets them know what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, so we have essentially we've got the public involvement community in Health and Care Research Wales. So we have 400 members of the public on our books, but also we can work with you to identify different organisations and different groups to go out with, as touched upon by the COVID-19 Evidence Centre, where we worked with underserved communities to involve them in the research priorities for COVID-19. How do I measure what difference they make to research? And we touch upon the impact tool and the impact tool that is coming out, but also you've got the GRIP2 impact tool, but also the public involvement impact assessment framework, which is available. At what stages should I involve patients and members of the public? All stages, and there's merit to involve in all stages, but equally, if your research doesn't lend itself to involving members of the public all stages, then don't worry. As long as you address this and looking through the stages of the research cycle where you can involve members of the public, brilliant. How can I support patients and members of the public? We have got a support service in Health and Care Research Wales, both for researchers and members of the public. So we provide training, we provide support, accessing funding and stuff like that. So we can provide support for you. How will public involvement benefit my research? It gives more of an impact. Lay voice, and we touched upon that earlier. Julie, do you want to step in how you've benefited research?
I was just actually thinking of adding something to the fourth one.
Yeah, crack on.
Well, it's still on the top of my head. And this supporting patients and members of the public. I think you're recommended to have 2 PPI on a trial management group or steering committee. And I think this is one way that we can help with the diversity aspect of it. That if you might want an experienced person who knows what it's all about on there, but then pick somebody who is a newer person who might not have the experience, and the two can work together, and the more experienced person can bring the other one on and advise them and just help them generally. So I think that that's a good, like a
mentorship scheme or something.
Mentorship scheme, I think, yes, yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. Oliver, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Julie. If we think back of what she mentioned about the duration of trials, I think that, as in other areas, there has to be some succession planning and sustainability, and having a team that is large enough. And so I think that this involvement of more inexperienced PPI members and initiation by the more experienced really is an important process, and should be kind of a permanent process that is taken from like generation to generation of PPI representatives.
We've got in Health and Care Research Wales, we've got a terms of reference template for advisory groups, but this can be replicated to a trial management group, where we recommend members of the public to be involved X amount of months, depending on the research cycle, but depending on the research, sorry. And with them, they train up new members of the public to get involved and support throughout. So it's constantly evolving. But yeah, as I said, one size doesn't fit all. So it's yeah, fun and games. And what types of input will patients and members of the public have? They can be involved in loads of different stages and loads of inputs, as Julie's here now in the engagement element and talking to you about our experiences. So there's loads. I hope we've answered these all. I'm sure there's going to be some more questions in the question box. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I think one of the ones you may have just touched on it there. Is there a central pool of the public who regularly get asked about research? Don't these then become experts and an extension of the research staff? And how important is it to have a native public members to the process?
So we do have a pool of public involvement members. Yes, they know about research, but they also give their lived experience. So there's merit for that as well. This pool is constantly evolving, but we do get new members regularly coming to the public involvement community who can give fresh perspectives of it. But I mean, lived experience, it goes a long way to public involvement and feeding it back into the research.
I've got a question here for Oliver. Are there Cardiff ECMC network groups that PPI can be involved in?
So the ECMC, the Cardiff ECMC, obviously has a PPI team, and so Julie is our point of contact and ultimate authority. And there's actually another Cardiff initiated wider group, the ECMC hematology group, which, although it is led by Cardiff, involves other centers, ECMC centers throughout the whole network, and we do have PPI representation on that as well. So the answer, as I understand the question to both, is yes. It's always open for more. And then on the additional, the input, I alluded to the fact that the Cardiff ECMC does not exist in isolation, but interacts with a lot of clinical and research labs. And so there will be, additional PPI contacts that are linked to the individual collaborators. Does that answer the question?
I think that does. Thank you, Oliver. I think a question maybe for Pete here. How often do commercial companies approach Hcrw to access PPI groups? If they don't want, do you think needs to be done to, if they don't, what do you think needs to be done to improve this?
Yeah, it's, as Julie mentioned earlier, it's quite a new thing to commercial companies accessing our community. They have done, and they have developed adverts, and we have recruited members of the public to support the clinical trials aspect of it. What can be done to encourage people? I don't know. I don't really know. We could make it essential, where they have to recruit members of the public. But yeah, we encourage commercial partners to use our public involvement community and support public involvement that way. I think Joe's going to jump in and.
Yeah, I can just add to that ECMC is certainly reaching out to industry partners in Wales through the Wales Cancer Industry Forum, who are also really keen about the idea of engaging with PPI groups. So yes, it's small and growing, but it's through kind of networks and comms with partners such as the Wales Cancer Industry Forum and beyond that helps us connect with other UK and global commercial partners to lobby for change really in this area. So it doesn't come just through HCRW, I'm sure.
No.
We have approaches directly to ECMC. There'll be approaches through our sort of industry network contacts as well. So just increasing our, casting the net wider, I think will help to increase those interactions.
Thank you. One, I don't know who's going to take this one, but are certain projects or research more of a challenge when it comes to gaining public and patient involvement? Stunned you all.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
no, go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, if there's, things that are heavily statistical and data orientated, I think it might be more difficult to recruit PPI, who maybe you just want to keep away from that aspect of it. Yes, you're going to say something, Oliver, on that.
Yeah, essentially, I agree, Julie. There's also always this matter of interest, and interest in a way is being affected in some way, either directly or indirectly, family, friends, or so, and so that just naturally biases towards more interest in clinical questions than in hardcore science. So I think I'd absolutely agree with your answer, Julie.
Yeah, I think the science aspect could put some people off the more sort of laboratory preclinical end as well. Yeah, but then it's attractive to some people. I like science. So.
Exactly. I think, Pete, you mentioned the quarterly forum and also some training that can be accessed. Are there links to these? Can we circulate anything?
Yeah.
How easy is it to find on sort of websites and things like that?
Yeah, it's all on our public involvement section on our website. I can circulate a link to you guys, and then you can circulate it further afield. Yeah, so the forums take place on the 6th of July, 10 till 12:30. Shameless plug there. And we do training as well. So we do, there's an online introductory training, which you can do at your own pace. We've got 1 hour training, and also we've got a 3 hour in-person training. So that's taking place on the 14th of July in Cardiff, if anyone's available and would like to come along there. But yeah, we do training quite a lot, and there's different support that we can provide.
I think we've got one final question here. Maybe I lost you all there for a second. Are there different regulations or rules for PPI, Wales, UK and international, and how challenging can this be?
UK, no. We are part of the 5 Nations approach, so we work closely with NIHR, CSO, Ignite in Ireland and Northern Ireland as well. So we've got a 5 Nations approach. We've recently developed a shared commitment to public involvement as well. So this is working with the Hcrw. Internationally, I'm not 100% sure, but I know UK-wide it's the same principles. Yeah,
I think that there are some differences just in the way the PPI is organised in different areas. I'm thinking of there's a trial I was involved in through the University of West of England, who insisted in putting me onto the payroll, which I will never ever do again.
Yeah,
because it's just a nightmare. But that was just the way they did it. And they wanted all their PPI people to be on the payroll, so it's up to them, I suppose.
And that's why we've developed this guidance paper that's recently come out. So we're doing a 6-month consultation in use. It's to make sure that organisations who do involve members of the public, that they're involved in members of public properly, so not putting on the payroll, because it is a volunteer role, but there's incentives for members of the public to get involved.
Just as sort of a follow-up question, are you all happy to be contacted if anybody, a participant here or any of our YouTube viewers wants more information on something specific? Are you happy? Are your contact details easily to find on the university website? Yeah, great. Fantastic. That's good to know. Peter, we've got one last question for you, which is slightly off topic, I'm afraid. What was the name of the bread dish you recommended at the start?
Megas. Megas is dry stale bread, loads of garlic, tomatoes and olive oil. and it's delicious.
See, this webinar is PPI and recipe recommendations. So we've covered quite a lot of topics here. I think that's all we've got time for today. So I want to thank everybody who's attended and everyone who's taken part in this session. As I mentioned, we'll be circulating an evaluation, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys could take just a few moments to fill that out. And don't forget that this session and all our other virtual summer school sessions are recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. And you can contact the team if you need any further information from Peter, Oliver or Julie, and we can sort of put you in touch. Thank you all very much for taking part, and thank you for a fantastic informative session today.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Take
Enjoy the
care.
rest of the
Bye.
afternoon.